So we're going to deal with the perfect tense here. This is Mounce's chapter 25. And the perfect active indicative and the perfect middle passive indicative are where we're going to focus our attention in this chapter. Now, when we deal with a perfect tense, okay, what we're dealing with, I just want to talk a little bit about the semantics of this. The idea of the perfect tense is to indicate action that has two qualities about it, okay? That it was, it occurred in the past. This is typically what our perfect tenses will involve. Actions that occurred in the past, but at the same time, there's an additional constraint, is that there are implications for that action at the time of speaking. So I'm going to put the word present here in quotation marks here. So what I mean by present here is I mean the time of speaking, okay? So if I say, for example, I have eaten, and I say that now, you understand that the action of eating happened before I said it. That is what makes it past, you see? But there is some ongoing relevance to my having eaten. Someone might say, are you hungry? And I would say, no, I've eaten. So what does that mean? Well, it means that I ate in the past, but I'm using that perfect tense in English for the idea that the action that is completed has some ongoing relevance, because I'm not hungry right now and I don't really care to eat what you're offering me. Okay, that's time of speaking. Now, if I'm reporting speech and I say something like, last week when Bertha asked me if I was hungry, I told her, no, I've eaten. What's the time frame of that? Well, the dialogue happened in the past, right? Last week. And so there's a sense in which all of it's past, and yet by saying in the past, I have eaten, at the time of saying it back then, it had ongoing relevance. The eating had ongoing relevance to the time I said it, okay? This is an important distinction to make, because sometimes people will just use the word present without any kind of nuance there. And so they'll say, if you see, like in the Bible, a tense is in the perfect tense, then what that means is that its effects are ongoing all the way to the present, like right now, in our context in 2018. Now, that might be true, but it's not because the perfect is used. It's because of the nature of the discourse context, okay? So you just want to be careful with that. All right. Well, this is a Greek tense, and one of the things that we're going to learn about it is how to form it, okay? So let's pay attention to that now. Before we talk about how to form this, just one word about the way we translate Greek perfect tenses. Typically, you will see them translated using the the English present perfect tense or the English present tense. So what does the English present perfect tense look like? It's I have and then blanked. Okay, so whatever would go in that little slot there, that's the form we're going to use. So I have eaten, I have smoked, and stuff like that. Or the present, we could just have something like I know. Okay. Example here is, I think we have seen quite a number of times the verb oida. You guys remember oida? All right. Oida is translated as I know, but technically this is not a present tense verb form. It is actually a perfect verb form. Okay. And its present implications are so prominent that most people just translate it as a present state of knowledge, so they would translate it as I know. On the other hand, if we take a verb like luo and put it in the perfect active indicative, leluka, I would translate that as I have loosed, okay? I have loosed. Now, someone asked a question just a while ago, what's the difference between the imperfect tense and the perfect tense? And the difference here is that the imperfect tense is referring to action that is past time, but has a continuous nature to the action itself. What we're talking about here with the perfect tense, we're talking about something that typically occurs in the past, it ends in the past, but its relevance is somehow ongoing and at the time of speaking, or at the present time, meaning the time that the speaker is referring to that action. All right. Let us take a look now at how to form the perfect, okay? And we will go ahead and use a verb form here, le, lu, ka, men, all right? These are 4 elements that we're going to get familiar with for the perfect active indicative. So I'm going to abbreviate perfect as PFT, not P, because P for me is present, all right? So perfect, active, indicative. Look at what we've got. You see the lu here? That is the stem of the verb. The stem is the most basic form of a verb in a particular tense. And so we have a perfect stem, okay? Now, look at the lay in front of the lu. This is finally what we come to from your master verb chart as an example of reduplication. Reduplication. When you duplicate something, you double it, right? So what happens when you reduplicate it? Do you double it twice? No. This is really, in my opinion, it's a redundant term. Okay? You just double it once. So basically, in reduplication, what we're going to see is that the stem is usually going to start with a consonant, and so you double the consonant and add it as a prefix, and then you break up the 2 consonants with a vowel, and it's going to be the epsilon. Okay? So we are going to see reduplication. Now, this reduplication is not an augment. It's not an augment. Are we all clear on that? Okay? Augments are one thing, reduplications are an entirely different thing. Now over here, I have kappa alpha. That is my tense formative for the perfect active indicative. Okay? So I get kappa alpha, and then my personal endings here will be on the last part. By the way, which personal ending is men? First plural. Okay? So this is we. So I would translate this as we have luoed. We have loosed. Okay? Now, which personal endings am I going to see used here? What is your guess? Ah, right. So we're going to use the primary active ones. Now, that raises a question, doesn't it? Because if the action was performed in the past, shouldn't it be a secondary tense that uses the secondary endings? But it doesn't have an augment, and this is why I jumped up and down and screamed a few weeks ago that a secondary tense is an augmented tense, but reduplications are not augments, are they? They're different. So this is an unaugmented tense, and therefore it has to use the primary endings. Okay? Primary endings. It's also the case, I think, that because the relevance of the action continues into the present, so to speak, that may be one of the factors that prevents it from being an augmented tense. Although there are some questions still as to how best to understand the nature of the perfect tense, even in modern studies. But let's talk a little bit more then about what to expect with these different forms. And first things first, let's take a look at the handout on the personal endings. So look over here. So we're not going to use the secondary ones. We're going to use the primary ones for the perfect. Okay? So if you can go back, for the active, the real endings are me-ct, mente, and t. Okay? Now let's take a look at what actually happens with these when we apply them to the perfect formation. All right? All right, so let's take the forms of lu, and we're going to just go from the first singular down to the third plural over here. What do I have to add to every one of these forms? I got to add the reduplication. So le, let it snow, lelu, lelu. Okay, that's easy. You can form this. All right, what's my next thing after the perfect stem? That's right. So I got to add caca everywhere. Okay. If you speak Spanish, I'm sorry, that probably sounds very awful. Okay, so le luca. And then my personal endings, which for the first singular should be what?
Nothing.
Well, let's just add the real endings. Me, si, ti, men, te, and ti. All right. So what is going to happen in reality now? Will this first singular ending be employed? No. So we're not actually going to see it, are we? Okay. Over here, the C is actually not going to be used either. Rather, the more common ending that we've seen for the imperfect and the aorist, we're just going to see a sigma. So le luca, le lucas. All right? That's still going to be an identifiable personal ending for you. And then here we have le lucati. This one is not going to be used either. The ka is going to look the same as the first singular. And so just as in the first aorist, sa became se for the third singular, ka is going to become ke. Okay? Okay? All right. So le luca, le lucas, le luke. Next, le lucamen and le lucate are perfectly fine the way they are, so we don't need to see any changes here. Now, take a look at the third person plural, le lucanti. What did we learn happens to a final tau iota? Before that, a final tau iota becomes a sigma iota. Okay? This is what happens in the present tense too, by the way. Okay? Luo, as an example. It's lu on t. The new tau iota was the real ending. The tau becomes a sigma, lu on c. And then news before sigma do what? They drop. News are dental nasals, and dentals before sigmas fall out. And then the short omicron will compensatorily lengthen to an omicron upsilon diphthong. Diphthongs are short or long? They are long. So I get lu-usi for my third person plural present active indicative. Okay? Now what I have here then is I have le lucanti, t becomes c. Now the nu is going to do what before the sigma? It's going to drop out, so I won't see that. And this alpha will compensatorily lengthen. And what will it look like when it's all done? It'll look the same, but it will be a long alpha, and it'll be le lucasi. Okay? So let's read the forms. And what I can do is go ahead and clean this up a bit. Delete that. And then put my sigmas and whatnot where they belong. And by the way, we'll have a movable nu there in that third person plural. Okay, so everybody, le luca. So I have loosed, le lucas. You have loosed, le luke. Or le lucan, as he, she, it has loosed. Le lucamen. We have loosed. Le lucate. Is y'all have loosed. And le lucasi. And I could have a movable nu here as well. So it's they have loosed. Okay? So this is the present active indicative. And then all the forms of that. Now, let's take a look at the middle passive forms. Okay? This is actually going to be really interesting. In the present, middle, and passive indicative, excuse me, not present, the perfect, we're going to find out that the middle and passive are identical to each other. And since we're in a primary tense, we have to use the primary middle passive endings for these. Okay, so our example here, let me just jot this down. Le, lu, my. We'll use the first person singular. What do you see here? Do you see a perfect stem? Yep. Okay, so there's my stem. You see reduplication here?
Yes.
Yep. What do you see here on the my? That's a personal ending. We're using middle passives, right, and the primary ones. What's missing here? There's no tense formative and there's no connecting vowel. This is one of the things that makes the perfect middle passive easy to identify, because you're going to have reduplication and a lack of something that you almost always see here. Okay, so there's several things that are like flashing neon lights to say, yo, I'm perfect, middle passively speaking. Okay. All right, so let's walk through the formation here. And by the way, how would I translate le lu mai? If le luka is I have loosed, active, what's the passive form? Le lu mai? Yeah, I have to say I have been, and then I use the English past participle principal part. I have been loosed. Yes, I have been loosed. Okay, so let's fill in the forms here, shall we? What do I want to add first of all on the front end of these? Add reduplication. I always take the initial consonant, write it again. What do I have in between them? Which one? Epsilon. That's right. So I now have le lu, le lu, le lu. Now, what tense formative do I add after the lu? Huh? None, I don't. What connecting vowel? None. I just go to the my, psi, tai endings. So my, psi, and tai. What's the first person plural? Metha. And then the and tai. Okay, good. And there we have it. So, lelumai, everybody say that. Lelumai. So I have been loosed. Lelusai. You have been loosed. You know how most of the time when we add psi to the end of a middle passive second singular, you've always sighed because the sigma of psi is between a connecting vowel and then the alpha of psi, and it always drops out and you get contraction. Here you get to see all of the real endings of the middle passive. Isn't that glorious? It's perfect. Yes, okay. So lelusai, you have been loosed. Lelutai. He, she, it has been loosed. Lelumetha. Y'all have been loosed. Leluste. I'm sorry, we have been loosed, says Metha. Leluste, y'all have been loosed. And then leluntai is they have been loosed. All right, good. Is it all clear? Can you identify the perfect active and perfect middle passive forms? Easy peasy, right? Okay, let's look at some peculiarities. When we reduplicate, if our verb begins with the consonant or the verb stem, then we repeat the consonant, right? And then separate it by the epsilon. So we've seen that with luo. Very, very easy. But we have some difficulties here. So we can do it normally, or we can have problems where we have aspirated consonants. When we have aspirated consonants, we've got a problem here. Let's take a verb like phanerao. Okay, phanerao. What does that mean? Anybody know phanerao? What's that? Yeah, to make manifest. Okay. All right. So take a look here. I've got phanera. This is a contract verb, and this phan here has a phi at the beginning. That is a consonant, right? And so the normal way of reduplicating is to write the consonant a second time before its initial position and to add an epsilon prior. That's going to leave me with fefa. Fefa. It almost sounds like a soccer league, doesn't it? What am I going to do here? The Greeks did not like to put into contiguous syllables these two kinds of aspiration. And so what ends up happening is a process called dissimilation. Dissimilation. Have we heard of assimilation, where a consonant becomes like another one? Yeah, and well, this is the Borg, absolutely. Well, dissimilation is when a consonant becomes unlike another consonant for some reason, some phonetic reason. And here it's going to dissimilate. Now, think about your square of stops. Phi is what kind of consonant? Labial, velar, or dental? Labial. It's labial, okay? So I want to keep my labial nature of the phi that's been reduplicated, but I don't want it to be aspirated, or I don't want it to be a fricative anymore. So I'm going to switch it to the stop version of the labial, and it's going to become the P. So fe-fa-na-ra-o is going to become pe-fa-na-ra-o before I add my other parts at the end. Okay?
What made us choose pi instead of beta?
Okay. Yeah, good question. The P and the beta are both the same consonant, except for the fact that I've got vocal cord vibration, right? P and B. P, B. So it's going to pick the voiceless variant of the two. By the way, all of your aspirated consonants are also voiceless. F, right? F, and so forth. Okay, so Pefaneroka is what we're going to see here. All right, now Charidzamai. Let's just, we'll just do the charids here for a minute. So if I were going to reduplicate that, that would normally be checharids, okay? But I can't put the two aspirates together. So what kind of a consonant is the chi? Labial, velar, or dental? It's velar, okay? So I'm going to go with the voiceless velar counterpart, which is a kappa. So kecharids. All right. And then the verb for healing is therapeo. Oops, not thara. That sounds like the way my brother speaks. He's a southerner through and through, and when he says fire, he says far, and tire is tar. So this is an epsilon, though, not thar. There. Oh, there was thar. That's right. Growing up, there was thar in Mississippi. What's that? Well, he didn't say Warsh, but my Tennessee family said Warsh. So when I went away to college in Washington, I went away to Washington. Yeah. So therapeuo. So anyhow, we want to look at the front part of this thera. I want to reduplicate it. I'd get thethe, and I can't do that. So what is the theta going to become when I reduplicate it? It's going to become the tau. Okay, so it'll be tethe. Okay? All right. Okay, so if our stem begins with a vowel, then the reduplication will not be by doubling the vowel. Okay? Reduplication will occur by lengthening the root initial vowel. That's how we reduplicate it. And when we do this, this is going to look a lot like augmenting a verb for the secondary tenses that starts with a vowel. All right? So let's take a look at example here. So we have agapa. Okay, that is our stem for to love, agapa. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to, in order to make this perfect love, right, I want to reduplicate the alpha, but I can't double the alpha and put an epsilon in between it. I have to take the alpha and I have to lengthen it. So what's your guess as to what an alpha will do to lengthen? Yes. And what would epsilon do? Yeah, these would go to eta. What would an omicron do? Those would become omega. Okay, so agapa is going to become agapa. And here, just a little bonus, if I'm going to add a tense formative here, what happens to contract vowels before tense formatives? They lengthen, so that would become an eta as well. So I'd get agapeka, for I have loved. I have loved. Okay? So there you see that vocalic reduplication.
So they're lengthening pretty much like all of our past tense vowels.
E- exactly. And this is why at the beginning of our lesson, I really tried to stress reduplication and augmentation are not the same thing, but they will look the same in situations like this. Okay? So you really want to be, especially for verbs like this, you want to be paying attention to the tense formative now. Does my tense formative match the aorist tense formative, or does it match the perfect tense formative? Because the front end's going to look the same in many situations.
So what happens if like you end up with like the verb agape, but it's middle passive? I don't know. Can it even be middle passive?
Yeah. It could be.
How would you identify it then, since there's not a tense formative?
Right. Well, the perfect wouldn't have the tense formative, but the aorist passive would, right? The theta eta would be my tense formative. So I'd still have something to help me distinguish the two. All right. Let's see. He gives another example here, but we don't really need to work through that one. Final situation here is if I have two consonants at the beginning of my stem. What are my possibilities here? An epsilon will be prefixed, okay, before the consonant cluster. Okay, two consonants is a consonant cluster. So let me just make sure that we're clear on that. So if we take our gno root here, gno, if I add my kappa alpha for the perfect, I'm going to put the epsilon before that, and it becomes egnoka. Egnoka. Now that looks like an augment too, doesn't it? Okay, but it's not. This is reduplication. How do I know it's reduplication and not an augment? And that is to say, how do I know it's a perfect and not an aorist? Yeah, the tense formative is here. Do you remember what the aorist of gnosko is? Yeah, it's a second aorist, okay, and it's egg known. So I don't have any connecting vowel here, and I'm going to see all of the secondary active personal endings. Here, I'm going to get the kappa alpha before I add any endings to it, okay? So that's going to be my big tip here. So that's the perfect. All right. That's with our two consonants. Oh, I almost forgot. There was one other situation here with the vowels that begin. If I have a diphthong, so this is a simple vowel, okay? But if I have a diphthong, what will happen with those?
They usually don't lengthen.
Okay. Yeah, we could have no lengthening. Okay, so take a verb like heurisco. What does heurisco mean? It's I find. That's the present. And here's the perfect, okay? It's heu, re, ka. You see, the epsilon, upsilon diphthong has not undergone any lengthening. And I've got the kappa alpha tense formative there on the back. Okay? All right. Let's look at the next little section here. When we have a compound verb, what do we do with compound verbs? Well, when we augmented compound verbs, where did the augment go? Yes, the augment went after the prefix and to the front of the stem, right? And the same thing here. Reduplication precedes the stem, not the prefix. Okay? Reduplication will precede the stem and not the prefix. So let's take a look at the example here, which is from ek balo, and we'll stop with that for today. Ek balo. The perfect is going to be ek bebleka. So you see your kappa alpha tense formative there. You see your ek prefix is here, and then the belay is my perfect stem, and I've gotten the beta reduplicated after the prefix but before the belay perfect stem. Okay, so ek bebleka. I have cast out. Okay, let's talk a little bit more here about the second perfect. Okay, we've learned about the first perfect, which uses the tense formatives kappa and alpha, and that's for the perfect active indicative. All right. For the second perfect, we're just going to use the alpha, okay? So first, second. Remember our rule about first and second forms? The second of any tense formation is always going to be lacking something that the first version of it has. As we saw before, theta, eta in the first aorist passive, just eta in the second aorist passive. Theta, eta, sigma for the first future passive, eta, sigma for the second future passive. Thinking of the aorist active, first aorist, sigma alpha, second aorist, none, exactly. So if we were to put these on scales, the first will always weigh more than the second because the second's always less than, okay? And so same thing here with our first aorist, our first perfect active and second perfect active. It's kappa alpha for the first perfect and just alpha for the second. So let's take a look at a couple of examples of your second perfect forms in Greek. All right, so akekoa is I have heard, so it's from akuo. And take a look at what I've got here. I'll go ahead and just jot the present active indicative. What do you see happening with akuo? There's actually two things that occur. Do you see the ak here has reduplicated what looks like the entire syllable? It looks like it's become ak. Okay? You see that? Then I have one of these has lengthened to an eta. The upsilon, or omicron upsilon, is now only an omicron. We call that vowel gradation. Remember that? All right. And then what I would expect would be a kappa alpha here for my perfect. And instead I just have the alpha. Okay? So that is a second perfect active indicative. I have heard. Ginomai is my present active indicative lexical form. Here's the perfect. It's gegona. Gegona. Okay? So you see the reduplication here of the gamma. The epsilon in between. Notice that I have gone, and then I should have had gone ka with a kappa alpha, but I just get the alpha instead of the kappa alpha. And so that is, remember, ginomai is to be or to become. I have become. All right.
Why did it reduplicate the alpha?
Yeah, it's just certain forms are going to do other kinds of reduplication besides the basic one. So this is one of those forms, like for akuo, most of the principal parts are very normal looking. This is one where I would suggest you learn the perfect active principal part, okay? Because it does look sufficiently different that it's a bit jarring at first. Once you see it a couple of times, then you won't. I don't think you'll have to think about it again.
What caused it to lengthen? Because we already added the app, so there was no other vowel added. Was there another vowel added to the original alpha? Is it the epsilon that goes with the reduplication?
Right here?
Yeah, what caused it to lengthen? We already added the app.
Yeah, I don't know for certain why it has to lengthen. But this is just a feature of some of the verbs. We get reduplication, and sometimes we see that one of these vowels is lengthened on top of the reduplication. All right. Was there a comment, question? Well, this omicron upsilon has shortened to the omicron here. for sure. But the alpha kappa has reduplicated, so it would have been ak, and then one of the alphas has lengthened. And he's asking about that, and I don't really have an answer for that. Okay. Gegona, so as I have become, and I also want you to notice one other thing. The present lexical form has a my ending. The perfect has what? Is that primary or is that active or middle passive kind of ending there? It's active, okay? So you know how in some tenses Greek uses middle passive forms for that tense, and in other tenses it uses the active personal endings. And so for the perfect, I have become is going to use the active. So it's not some sort of a my form like you might have expected. Okay? Well, yeah, it's just to become. So you're just making it the perfect tense for it. So I have become. Here it's I become, present tense. The aorist would have been I became. Perfect is I have become. So all of those are active in your translation, but the first two were middle in their formation, and this one's active in its formation. Still means the same thing, just a different tense.
And imperfect would be I was becoming?
Yes, I was becoming. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Okay, so here's a question for you. Remember how to form the perfect, middle, and passive indicative. How did we do that? Let's use luo as our example. What's the formation here? Okay, I'm going to reduplicate, and then what? Okay, then the stem, and then what? No connecting vowel. What else? No tense formative. I go straight to the primary, middle, passive personal ending. So I get the my, sai, tai endings. Le, lu, my. So there's not a tense formative in the perfect, middle, and passive. They're identical in form to each other, the middle and passive are, and there's no tense formative. So let me ask you this. In the perfect, middle, passive, is there such a thing as a first perfect and a second perfect middle passive? No, because when we have first and seconds, there's got to be a tense formative that gets somehow reduced for the second form of that, right? And if there's not a tense formative at all, I can't have a second perfect passive, okay? In the aorist passive, I could have first aorist passive and second aorist passive, and so forth, okay? So there is no second perfect in the middle passive, only in the active formations of the perfect, okay? All right. Just to go back to this matter of the principal parts, since we're learning the perfect, I just want to show you in Mounce's appendix, where do we find the perfect principal parts here? So this is column number 1, present. 2 is future. 3rd is aorist. These are typically the active forms, unless these are tenses that use a middle form for their tense there. And then the 4th column is where you're going to find the perfect active, okay? 5th column will be the perfect middle passive indicative. And then the 6th column is the aorist passive. So you had learned 1, 2, 3, and 6. Now we're learning 4 and 5 here, okay? So if you want to know what the perfect stems look like in these different formations, that's where you're going to look. Let me show you another example of that matter of reduplication of not just a consonant, but a vowel and a consonant. Here we have from op erkamai, so you have apa plus erkamai. The perfect is a second perfect. Notice I don't have a kappa alpha here, but just an alpha. And I have elelutha. Elelutha. What's happened here? This is L reduplicated, LL, and then uth. Okay? Do you remember what the real verbal root here is? It's aluth. Oops. Aluth like that, okay? That is the real verbal root that the apa has been added to. And then what's happened here? I've had reduplication of the L, lengthening of the second vowel, so the LL becomes LL. The epsilon upsilon has reduced its voweling. You see that? Just like akuo did that. We had akuo over here. It became just an omicron from an omicron upsilon. And then the theta. So you can see the elements of the root here, but it just looks a lot different than the root because of the manipulation of the stem, you see. And then the alpha of the second perfect active tense formative there. Now, not every perfect does that. If you take a look at akalutheo, does anybody remember what that means? To follow. It's akalutheka. That's very normal, isn't it? Akuo became ak-ak, but akalutheo didn't become ak-ak. Okay? It just lengthened its first vowel to form a reduplication, and then it got the kappa alpha. One more thing that we notice is that this is a contract verb. What happens to contract vowels before you add tense formatives? They lengthen. Okay, and so we see that too. All right. Any questions about this? All right. So in Mounce 2523, before we talk about middle ideas, we want to just finish out our discussion of the perfect. And we have some phonetic issues that happen when we add the perfect tense formative to when we add the middle passive endings to the perfect middle passive forms. So if you take a look here, we're dealing with the matter of stop consonants. As you've noticed, stops can be tricky in the Greek language. They interact with other consonants, and they then behave or misbehave, as the case may be. And so take a look at a word like grapho here. Okay, what kind of a consonant is that phi? That's a labial, okay? And in our square of stops, that occupies the what I like to call the fricative column of the labials. We have P with beta and then the phi, okay? Now, what I'm going to see happening is once I do my reduplication, so gay graph, I'm going to be adding the my, psi, and tie endings and so forth. There's going to be problems with my phi interacting with these consonants here. So a phi preceding a mem is going to cause some assimilation. And this is really what we're dealing with in a lot of these situations. Assimilation, okay, where a consonant can become more like the consonant that it is adjoining or butting up against. What do we know about mu? Well, mu is a labial, isn't it? M. You have to use both of your lips. It's a bilabial. The phi is using your lips as well. All right. And this labial here, though, is going to nasalize in anticipation of the mu here, which is nasal as well as labial, and it's going to force an assimilation to a nasal labial consonant. So it becomes fully assimilated here. So it's not going to be gegraphmai, but gegrammai. Now think about that. Isn't it a lot easier to pronounce gegrammai than gegraphmai? Yes, it is. Okay? Now what about phi before a sigma? That's a labial before a sigma. You already know what happens here, don't you? So this is going to become psi. Okay, so gegraphsai becomes gegrapsai. There, I made it nice and big. And then how about the phi before the tau here of tai? Ge, graph, tai. The tau is a stop consonant where it gets a full stop, right? In other words, it's not a fricative. It's not a th sound. It's a t It's a full stop, okay? And so the phi here is going to keep its labial quality, but it's going to assimilate partially, not fully. This was full assimilation. It became exactly the following consonant. Here it's going to become partially like the tau. What quality of the tau will it assimilate to? The stop and voicelessness of it, which is to say the phi will become the voiceless stop counterpart, which is P. Yes. So gegraptai. Gegraptai.
Why not a theta?
Well, think about theta followed by a T, and yeah. Think about a theta followed by a stop. Th.
No, if both of them became, like, we had a psi, why not, they just both contract to theta?
Why didn't the T become a theta? I'm not sure what you're.
Why didn't
So it would have been gegraptai,
graph tie,
right?
would be graph.
Gegraptai.
Also, why did the tau become a phi?
Yeah. Apparently it's just easier to do the stop P plus the stop T, and they're both voiceless. Gegraptai, as opposed to gegraptai. Because you're having to blow air through one consonant and then immediately stop it here. Whereas with gegrapt, there's not a whole lot to do, right? All right. Very good. So you have the other issue here is what happens with the second person plural. So I have gegraf, and then I should have stay here, right? Oh wow, that looks like an arrow. So gegraf stay. What would I expect to happen? Normally I would expect nothing to happen, right? Except that there's this other situation where not only does a sigma that is intervocalic like to drop out, but guess what? A sigma that is interconsonantal also will want to fall out too. All right, because I've got quite a consonant cluster here. And so when the sigma falls away, I have two fricatives side by side. And that's okay. Okay, so gegrafte. Gegrafte.
What? So why does the sigma dropping out why is that over the sigma working with the to make the psi? Like why doesn't the sigma go with the phi?
Yeah, well, it would end up creating a very difficult consonant cluster. Okay, so what I'd have is a psi followed by a theta. Psla. Now you try that. Psla. Sounds like you're spitting, doesn't it? All right. Yeah. No. But again, I think I've mentioned this to you. I like to call these sorts of phonetic changes the principle of linguistic laziness, because that's what's happening. Our mouths are just doing what's easiest for them to do in the production of these consonant sounds. All right. So anyhow, it's the same sort of principle with these other stems that end with stops, okay? So we'll just look at a couple more examples. I have been pursued. Dioko reduplicates the delta. And then I'm going to add my mysitai endings to diok. And I'm going to see similar problems here that need to be resolved. Diokmai, dioksai, dioktai. Okay? So what happens here? We had full assimilation of the labial P or phi to the mu over here. But kappa is not a labial. So it's not easy to get full assimilation here. What's it going to do? It is going to partially assimilate. In what way? The kappa is voiceless and the mu being a nasal is voiced. That is, it vibrates the vocal cords, right? Everybody go, and put your hand on your throat. Can you feel the vocal cords vibrating? Mm-hmm. Yes, you can. Okay, if you do a k sound, you shouldn't hear your vocal cords vibrating. If you're having trouble with that, then plug your ears and do the k sound. Now do the sound. You should hear that buzz just reverberating in your brain, right? That's what the vibration of the vocal cords do. That's voicing, okay? So the kappa is not going to fully assimilate to the mu because there's nothing labial about it. But it is voiceless, and the mu's voiced, and so it's going to become the voiced counterpart of the kappa, which is what? Gamma, exactly. So it'll be dead de ogmai. Dead de ogmai. Okay? Take the kappa and add it to the psi, dead de ok psi, and we get that xi, that combination sound for the consonant xi, and so that is certainly predictable. And then dead de ok tai. Notice that again, velars and dentals are not produced in the same place, and there's no need to assimilate this at all. This is also unvoiced, and so is the tau. They're both stops. So they actually play very nicely together. De ok tai. There's nothing hard about saying de ok tai, right? All right. And then for the methyste and untai, I think you can see what might happen there. The final thing I guess I should say about this is that on the matter of the third person plurals, you don't actually see the ntai endings. Rather, what you see is what's called a periphrastic sort of formation. Third person plural. You will see a form of a me in the third person plural, so a scene, and then you're going to see what is a passive participle. Okay? Now, you don't know participles yet, do you? But this is going to be translated as they are, and then written. Okay? They are, and for the participle of deoko, they are pursued. Okay? So anyhow, that's the way you'll see that in the third person plural. All right, let's move on. If you're interested in the pluperfect, you can look at that on your own. Let's do a real quick overview of this middle voice material here.
Why did you? Oh, never mind. I think it's good.
All right, great. So this is 25:15. Okay, so middle voice. We have already talked a little bit about middle voice here, and in this little section, Mounce tries to give us a little bit of a fuller introduction to it. He describes, first of all, the indirect middle, which he says is the technical term for the idea of self-interest in the middle voice. Indirect middle. The idea that you do something that is somehow to your benefit, or that in some way affects you. And he uses examples from Matthew 27. Pilate took water and he washed his hands. So there you see that anipsata, or excuse me, anipsata, is using the middle formation. So I've got a sigma alpha. You can't see the sigma because it's in the psi, and then your middle endings. This is not an aorist passive, by the way, because aorist passives would have the theta eta ending. So this is clearly an aorist middle. Who's doing the washing here? This is third singular. Yeah, Pilate's washing, okay? But he's washing his own hands, isn't he? So he's also affected by the action that he undertakes to do. So one of the things that that Mounce points out, and this is right, is that the self-interest idea is one of the less likely options for the translation of the middle. And that's why, even though beginning students learn the middle when a verb has a middle meaning where there's an active possibility, they often will translate the middle as he does or did such and such for himself, or she did such and such for herself. That's really an artificial way of translating the middle voice, and I only sanction it from the standpoint that it allows me to know that you know that it's a middle form and say not an active form, okay? But it's not always the best to say things like with I ask for myself, okay? Now, take a look at 25.17. Here we have not just an indirect middle, but what might be termed a direct middle or a reflexive idea for the middle, okay? In this type of middle use, the subject is actually acting upon himself or herself when the middle form is used. So if you look at the example from Matthew 27:5, this is Judas here, and it says here, op exata. Okay, get rid of that. Again, notice that you have a sigma alpha here in that C alpha. That is a third singular middle ending for the aorist. And there is no reflexive pronoun here. Okay, you've learned hey, al. Oh boy, I can't seem to write today. You've learned hey, al, tan, haven't you? Yes? Okay. This is the reflexive pronoun that you use when you act upon yourself. That's not being used here. This is not an active verb with a reflexive pronoun. It's just a middle verb all by itself, okay? And this is translated as hung himself, okay? So in English, you'll have a reflexive pronoun, even though in Greek there's not one present in this particular context. Sometimes you will have both a middle form and a reflexive pronoun, and that's referred to by Mounce as the redundant middle, or the direct or redundant middle, and that's a situation where the middle form by itself would have been sufficient to indicate the reflexive idea, but then you have an overt reflexive pronoun on top of that. So that's the reason that it would be called redundant.
So what's the, I guess that I'm confused, so what's the difference between the indirect middle and the direct middle?
For the indirect middle, you're not necessarily acting upon your person, okay? So like if I said something like, take like your heurisco, okay? So the middle form of heurisco is I obtain, meaning, as he puts it, I obtain for myself. I'm not doing anything to my body, right? But if I hang myself, I'm taking my body and stringing it up, as it were.
So
Okay.
like, if you're saying I'm washing my hands, that would be a direct middle?
It's not exactly a direct middle because it's singling out a part of you that is being washed. Okay, he puts this under the indirect middle. All right, but if it was something like I washed myself, that would be a direct middle. I washed my hands means that I am affected by that, but not my whole me, but part of me. Okay? So the reflexive idea is where you act on yourself. Okay? And you can actually say myself, himself, herself as the direct object of the verb. In English anyway. And so if I say I washed my hands, I'm not saying I washed myself, am I? All right. So that's basically the idea here. Just one last comment here about parsing, okay? And this is really the part of discussing the middle that's a bit difficult given the given the terminology that's been used in standard Greek grammars for decades and decades and decades. So, as you know, Mounce likes the word deponent, and he uses that for verbs that don't have an active formation for a particular tense. And so the only form that's available to them in those tenses are middle or passive forms, okay? And as I've mentioned to you, many people are starting to jettison the notion and the terminology of deponent. So if a verb has an active formation and then you see it in a middle form, then you definitely should parse that as a middle form. But what if it has no active form? What should you do? I really do recommend that you just call it a middle form, okay? So if you see something like genetai, for example, how would you want to parse that? Third singular, and then it would be present, middle, indicative, and your lexical form would be genomai. Mounce is going to use deponent. He may even call this middle deponent, okay? But I really do, this is Dr. Marshall's recommendation, okay? So let's go ahead and try to do that for verbs that are traditionally labeled as deponent. Okay? Yes?
What if it's not clear if it's middle or passive?
Yeah, okay, so if you're just parsing a verb and the verb only occurs in the middle passive formation, then you could say middle passive. Okay, that'll be fine. So middle or middle passive. If it's active, if a verb has an active formation and it's in one of the tenses that distinguishes between the middle and the passive, then you can go ahead and label it one way or the other.
So with genetai, could that one also be passive?
Yeah, in the present, the middle or the passive ending would have been the same, right? All right. But you're going to find some times where you'll get an aorist passive form where there also was an aorist middle form for the same verb, and they'll have the same meaning. And there a middle form was used and a passive form was used in the other case. And so you could actually specify the form as being middle or passive. Okay, good. Well, let's stop there.